evening, everyone. My name is Candace Baldwin, and I'm a member of the Race Matters Speaker Series Committee. On behalf of the committee, I am delighted to welcome you to the Racial Equity, Voter Suppression, and Democracy panel, which is the inaugural session of the newly launched Speaker Series. The core belief of the Race Matters Speaker Series is that resistance, advocacy, community, and education matters. And the Speaker Series will keep these concepts at the forefront as we engage the Hopkins community in issues that impact Black and Latinx people. Our goal is to provide a unique experience for all participants that focuses on academic research, current events, and ongoing conversations in dismantling racism in its many forms and levels. We believe the experiences of Black and Latinx people matter. We hope that tonight's conversation, as well as future conversations within the Speaker Series, will challenge you not only as individuals, but as members of the Hopkins community to be intentional advocates who fully embrace the importance of an anti-racism stance. Lastly, we know engagement, in particular, our actions, matters. Our nation is at a critical point in its history. Now more than ever, we understand that it's important that everyone participating in this webinar, regardless of party, ideology, or race, feels informed, engaged, and ready to take action at the end of the night. As we continue to explore these issues related to racial equity, voter suppression, and democracy. And now, I would like to introduce Dr. Smita Ruzicka, Dean of Student Life at Johns Hopkins University.
Thank you so much, Candace. Thank you for the wonderful welcome. I am thrilled to be a part of this inaugural and important speaker series, Race Matters. Welcome and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Hopkins community and on behalf of the staff at Student Life, I am thrilled that you have decided to join us tonight. I want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about how we are here today and the context of this important speaker series. But first, I just want to do a quick introduction of myself. I am Smita Ruzicka, and I serve as the Dean of Student Life here at the Homewood campus at Johns Hopkins University. Here at Hopkins, we are deeply committed to preserving and enhancing the dignity and equality of all people on our campus and connected to those in our community. This end goal aside, we also know that we are part of a world-class university that has been the leader in research and education. And so as we launch this speaker series, we want to come to this point with the goal of continuing in the tradition of providing education and food for thought, but also connecting our community to one another. In specifics, we want to bring to the surface and amplify the reality of many of our BIPOC students, the experiences that our community members face. We know that college, and we always strive to have our college campus be a unique and inclusive community, but we know that there are many opportunities for us to make it even stronger in terms of our inclusion. This summer, President Daniels and Provost Kumar announced the formation of the Roadmap 2020 Task Force to review our current roadmap on diversity and inclusion and to make recommendations for the next 5 years with measurable goals and accountabilities that will help us identify and build on successes and act to address areas where improvement is necessary. In my role on the Homewood campus, I have also invited a wonderful and dedicated group of staff to join me in the Black and Latinx student experience and bring attention to the needs of these particular students on our campus. This team of talented and dedicated professionals have been tackling a number of content areas, making recommendations, engaging with students, and elevating potential solutions or action steps to move the needle on student satisfaction and the student experience. The Race Matters series is a product of that working group and one of many to come. This speaker series is important and is coming to you in an important moment, both in our nation's history and in the larger context of acknowledging where we are. The university and divisional leadership are deeply committed to undertaking the work necessary to make JHU as inclusive and supportive as a community as it can be. As the Dean of Student Life here on the Homewood campus, I have the privilege and opportunity to work alongside some of the most brilliant and focused students and colleagues in the world. So, as we embark on what we hope to be a new chapter in our histories, I hope that the content within the Race Matters series allows for acceptance of new knowledge, calls to action, and appreciation for all the hard work that many are doing to lift the voices of our students and communities of color. I also want to take this moment to deeply express my gratitude to the subcommittee that has been planning this particular series for months. Thank you for all your dedication, your creativity, and your pursuit in finding amazing and talented people to come and speak on such important issues. And with that, I want to turn it back to Candace to start our program.
Thank you so much, Dean Bazika. I now would like to introduce our moderators for tonight's session. Manny Hernandez is a junior majoring in economics and international studies and minoring in financial economics. Manny currently serves as the president of the social entrepreneurship organization, Enactus. Peggy Oben Nyako is a senior double majoring in molecular and cellular biology as well as Africana studies. She's currently the Research History and Education Chair of the Black Student Union and the Vice President of the Rho Omega chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Please join me in welcoming tonight's moderators.
Dr. B, we're really excited to be here. And with that, Peggy and I will go ahead and introduce the panelists, starting with Mrs. Chapman.
Good evening, everyone. Our first panelist tonight is Lee M. Chapman. Lee is the director of the Voting Rights Program at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Lee has experience advancing democracy issues for nonprofit organizations, state government, and a political organization. Prior to joining the Leadership Conference, she was a senior policy advisor at Let America Vote, where she advised the organization on election law and policy issues at the state and federal levels. Lee was appointed Director of Policy for the Pennsylvania Department of State by Governor Tom Wolf in 2015. At the Pennsylvania Department of State, she managed the department's policy and regulatory development process in coordination with the Governor's Office of Policy in the program areas of charities, corporations, elections, and professional licensure. Lee began her civil rights career at Advancement Project, where she served as a staff attorney in the Voter Protection Program and supported organizations on the ground in Florida, Nevada, Ohio, Virginia, and Wisconsin. She was counsel in Jones versus Denninger, a lawsuit challenging Wisconsin's restrictive photo ID law under the Voting Rights Act. Ms. Chapman graduated from the University of Virginia, earning a BA in American Studies and History, and received her JD from Howard University School of Law.
With our second panelist today, we have Jerry Gonzalez, who is the founding and current executive director of the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials, also known as GALEO, and the GALEO Latino Community Development Fund. GALEO, a statewide nonprofit and nonpartisan organization, has a mission to increase civic engagement and leadership development of the Latino community across Georgia. Gonzalez is a native of Laredo, Texas, and received his BS in mechanical engineering from Texas A&M University in 1995. He completed his Master's of Public Administration at the Andrew Young School of Public Policy at Georgia State University in 2005. Due to his efforts at GALEO, Mr. Gonzalez has been recognized by Georgia Trend magazine as one of the Georgia's 100 most influential Georgians for several years. He also dedicates time towards philanthropy. Gonzalez lives in Atlanta with his husband of over 23 years, Ray, an established and practicing pediatrician, and their dogs, Jenny and Zach. Jerry's hobbies include photography, travel, hiking, and he considers himself an avid road cyclist.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation, and thanks for the introduction, Manny.
Our third and final panelist for tonight is Nathan D.B. Connolly. Professor Connolly is a Herbert Baxter Adams Associate Professor of History here at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Connolly writes about racism, capitalism, politics, cities, and migration in the late 19th and 20th centuries. His work pays special attention to people's notions of family, property, and citizenship in the United States and the wider Americas. He's advancing at present 2 new book-length projects. The first is 4 Daughters, An American Story. This collective biography covers 4 generations of a single family, following the lives of 4 women of color whose forebears migrated from the Caribbean to the United States by way of Britain between the early 1900s and 1990s. A genuinely Atlantic history, 4 Daughters explores how Caribbean immigrants of color and their children defined success in America through years of British colonization, second wave feminism, the civil rights movement, right-to-work politics, and the war on drugs. His other book, Black Capitalism, The Negro Problem, and the American Economy, offers the first sweeping account of how Black economic success shaped the way Americans and immigrants understood the possibilities offered by capitalism in the United States. Apart from publishing at scholarly venues, he contributes frequently to public debates, including serving as a co-host on the weekly podcast Backstory, and as the director of the Racism, Immigration, and Citizenship Program here at Johns Hopkins University.
Good evening, everybody. Looking forward to our conversation.
Today's panel conversation is on racial equity, voter suppression, and democracy. As the election nears, it's increasingly important to recognize both the history and the contemporary forms of voter suppression in this country. Voter suppression takes the form of voter intimidation, poll taxes, literacy checks, grandfather clauses, disenfranchisement, and gerrymandering, just to name a few. The tactics of voter suppression primarily affect Black and Latinx communities and make it harder for these populations to participate in America's democracy. Voter suppression makes it harder for these populations to participate in America's democracy. It persists despite the passage of the 15th Amendment, which states that the right to vote should not be denied on account of race, as well as the Ku Klux Klan Acts, which declared, among other things, interference with voting a federal offense and the violent infringement of civil rights a crime. During the Reconstruction era and the immediate aftermath of the passage of these acts, Black Americans began voting in large numbers, and in some areas began to seize control of the political apparatus. These days, however, voter suppression has significantly decreased the number of Black and Latinx voters. Currently, about 30 million Black Americans and 32 million Latinx Americans are eligible to vote. Yet, only about 13% of both populations are registered to vote. In the 2018 midterm elections, Black people comprised about 51.4% of the voter turnout, while Latinx people comprised about 40%. In the 2016 presidential election, it was 59.6% and 47.6% respectively. These numbers aren't simply a result of an unwillingness to exercise the right to vote among these communities. They're reflective of historical and contemporary forms of suppression. Voter disenfranchisement is especially noticeable among those who have been incarcerated for felony offenses. It's a practice that's automatic upon release and affects millions of people, particularly Black men. Because of disenfranchisement laws, 1 in 7 Black men have lost the right to vote, and as many as 1 in 4 in states with the highest Black disenfranchisement rate. These statistics don't take into account those who cannot vote in states that require people who were formerly incarcerated on felony charges to pay fines or fees before their voting rights can be restored, a rule which can be seen as the new poll tax. One of the biggest ways in which voter suppression persists and can be seen is in gerrymandering, which is a practice that establishes unfair political advantages for a particular party or group by manipulating district boundaries. During the 2018 midterm elections in North Carolina, 50% of people voted Republican and 48% voted Democrat for a total of 13 congressional seats. Yet only 3 seats went to the Democratic representatives and the other 10 went to Republicans. However, if the districts were drawn to accurately reflect the population, it would have been half and half. This is a direct result of gerrymandering, which occurred in the state in 2010, when Republicans gained majorities in several state legislatures and redrew district lines to give their party candidates a greater chance of winning. Throughout America's democracy, voter suppression has shifted and mutated to be more reflective of the time period. This brings us to our first question of tonight's conversation. Given the ongoing pandemic, which form or forms of voter suppression, if any, are likely to affect the election? This is an open question for either of the panelists.
Sure. So I can start. Hi, this is Lee from the Leadership Conference. So we're 28 days until the election. And actually, I should say that the election is now. You know, we should really be viewing November 3rd as the last day that we should actually vote. Over 4 million people have actually voted already in our election, which is really astounding. You know, typically in elections, we've at this time in 2016, only about 70,000 people have voted. But, you know, this is a unique year. It's an unprecedented year. You know, we are really in a moment of reckoning in our nation. And, you know, over 200,000 people have passed away because of COVID-19. And we've seen state violence against Black Americans this year. And now we have a vacancy on the Supreme Court. And on top of all of this, you know, voter suppression just continues to persist in our country. All we have to do is really look at the primary elections to see how COVID-19 impacted voting. You know, we saw some polling places during the primary elections that were really pure chaos. There was lack of social distancing, safety measures, there was voter confusion because of last minute polling place closures and consolidations. There were long lines in states like Georgia and Wisconsin that lasted for hours. And, you know, in Georgia, and I know Jerry can talk about this, you know, some voters waited in line for 7 hours just to cast their ballot amid machine breakdowns, shortage of poll workers, and ballot problems, really putting our voters and our democracy at risk. So all spring and summer, the Leadership Conference and our coalition, we really advocated at the federal and state level to make sure that there were funds for state election officials. We were pushing Congress to give us $3.6 billion in funding in the next stimulus package so states could have safe and accessible elections. Unfortunately, we only got $400 million for safe and accessible elections for states. And the president tweeted out today that, you know, there's no more negotiation on stimulus. So that's something that's unfortunate because we really believe that people should not be risking their health for their right to vote. But one thing that we have done that we've been pretty successful at is really advocating at the state level for voters to have all options to cast their ballot this election. So, you know, we push for expanded vote by mail. We push for expanded early voting. And we really, you know, we wanted to make sure that people didn't have to choose between their health and their right to vote. So I think that we were pretty successful because, as I mentioned, over 4 million people have voted early to date so far.
I would only echo what's been said by Ms. Chapman in the sense that, you know, having people participate, particularly by way of a safe and efficient public institution like the post office, is going to be critical for making sure that we can increase voter participation as much as possible. Obviously, you've got a pretty incredible effort on the part of, you know, major entertainment outfits like the National Basketball Association trying to get awareness out about the vote. And so that's going to go a long way, I think, to increasing, hopefully, people's sense of obligation about wanting to participate and needing to participate in the means that are available. I also wonder about what effect the actual casualties and the crumbled infrastructure around just our general kind of civic life will have on the election. That research still has to be done, but it's going to be an important element to factor in as we imagine, you know, elders, for example, who have historically very high rates of voter turnout, you know, being particularly at risk as a result of the COVID pandemic. What will be the chilling effect on people being willing to go the extra mile if they have difficulty doing, you know, vote by mail or other, you know, kinds of stay-at-home options. I mean, these are the kinds of variables in the election that I know we're going to have to keep an eye on, and the extent to which organizers can be aware of this on the ground and initiate some kind of countermeasures or extra steps to allow those voices to register in the public arena will obviously be what's important between now and final election day.
Yeah, I'll just echo some of the comments made as well. I mean, which forms of voter suppression are we most concerned of? Really, all of them. There's all kinds of things that are happening right now. Just yesterday, as an example, we one of our cases against the state of Georgia was dismissed by a Trump-appointed federal judge, basically saying that language access isn't necessary, despite the fact that Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act is fully in place for a county, that the Secretary of State really shouldn't comply with Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act because it's a different agency, different election official sending information to voters in a federally mandated language access county, which is Gwinnett County in the metropolitan Atlanta area. I mean, there's a real hostility against language access in Georgia as just one example. Just yesterday, we were helping people register to vote to make sure that they met the deadline for registering to vote. And unfortunately, Georgia also has another a law that has a citizenship verification process. If you don't have a driver's license that indicates that you are a U.S. citizen, then you really can't register to vote online. We had to send people to the county elections offices because when they recently became naturalized citizens, but they weren't able to process their voter registration online because the driver's license information basically said that they weren't citizens yet, even though they had already become citizens. So that's why we're in litigation to this day against the state in that type of initiative. So it's exercising your right to vote in Georgia is like running a gauntlet in our democracy, that really all these barriers are put in front of people to freely exercise their right to vote when it really isn't necessary. Government should be making it easier for people to exercise their right to vote, to ensure that we have a representative democracy that reflects the values and the needs of our communities. And unfortunately, those are just two examples of what we can see on a day-to-day basis here in Georgia.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. That's a really great point or example, considering how lack of language accommodations is an example of voter suppression. And I also want to follow up with another question that falls into the evolution of voter suppression, right? Because I think we often think of voter suppression in terms of the 20th century context of, poll taxes, grandfather clauses. These are very explicit, egregious examples that we think to be long gone. And when we talk about the ones today, they seem to be a little bit more subtle, like gerrymandering, district lines being cut up in very nuanced ways. So I want to ask, in what ways has voter suppression evolved from the well-known past examples of suppression? Is there any way for us to draw lines from, for example, poll taxes and grandfather clauses into an example of voter suppression today? Or, and not necessarily straight lines, but just, evolving in a way that still has the same impact on maybe the same community. And this is, a question open to all the panelists.
So I'll jump in as the dusty historian and then let the more contemporary organizers take the baton. So the first thing I would want to say is, as much as we tend to think that we actually know the story of voter suppression and disenfranchisement, we don't know it all that well. It's surprising to people, for instance, to consider that, Black voter participation in the 19th century under the protections of Reconstruction was extraordinarily robust, and that, you had a variety of ways in which people were already laying a lot of the game plan that is still being deployed in the post, Shelby versus Holder era of 2013, right? Because a lot of what is important to understand about the Shelby decision is that the Supreme Court basically determined that parts of the country that had historically committed egregious forms of disenfranchisement are no longer now responsible for demonstrating that they're taking affirmative steps to ensure voter participation. So it's no accident that the same states that were, rampantly practicing disenfranchisement in the Reconstruction period are the very same states that are now rolling out elaborate forms of voter disfranchisement, right? So again, the voter ID laws, the gerrymandering, the state legislature control, the Operation Red Map strategy that the American Legislative Exchange Council rolled out as a way to make sure that they captured state houses and then redrew lines. That is about states' rights. That's a 19th century strategy. And so it's important to understand that what's so frightening about this period is that we are in as much danger now in 2020 as our counterparts were in the 1860s and 70s in losing the franchise. So just to give you a couple of examples about how dramatic this could potentially get, in the state of Louisiana, in the 1890s, you had, 130,000 registered voters. And in a mere, less than a decade's time, that number went from 130,000 to 1,300, a drop of 99% through the redrafting of state constitutions, through voter intimidation, and uses of really elaborate, seemingly colorblind instruments like the poll tax. Now, what's also fascinating about this, and this is why I think it's important as a strategy now, is at the same time that these clearly race-based approaches to disenfranchisement were occurring, they were also snatching up and disfranchising white voters to a tremendous extent. And this is something that I, again, think gets lost when we're talking about voter suppression now. We're talking about a broad-based consensus issue. White voting in Mississippi was, the voter participation rate was almost 80% in the high 70s. And after the imposition of the poll tax and a couple of generations of literacy tests and all the rest of it, voter participation in Mississippi, in the heart of the Deep South, in the 1950s, fell from the high 70s to around 15%. And this was the case in southern states across the board, where there was massive rolling out of these instruments. In the state of Florida, which in 2016, basically passed Amendment 4 to get rid of what seemed like felon disenfranchisement, it basically recreated under DeSantis a kind of poll tax. There's a fee attached to getting your franchise back. And again, this has had a tremendous impact on impoverished voters of a variety of ethnic backgrounds and historical backgrounds. And so I think among the things that have to happen now are, number one, an appreciation of the geographic and historical nature of 21st century disenfranchisement. Why is it that, one, you have many of the very same state level strategies being deployed? Why is that still the case? To what extent do we need to confer deep federal protections? And frankly, even in the opening reference to the 15th Amendment, the Constitution does not give voting as a positive right. It only talks about it as a right that can't be infringed upon. So an actual strategy for the 21st century means a constitutional amendment that writes in voting as a born birthright, not simply as something that can't be impinged. And so, these are just a variety of ways where we can actually look to the earlier period to try to come up with a much more robust playbook, and absolutely make the consensus argument now that whatever race-based targeting is going on in this campaign, in this moment, which clearly is happening, is going to have tremendous, terrible consequences for everyone who believes that the political process should represent them. Because it's not simply a case that people want, only Black people or only Latino people to not vote. They want a mass muzzling of working people, of immigrant people, of anybody who's not part of a very elite governing class. And rest assured that that is the end goal of whatever disfranchisement measure is going to be put in place.
That's really interesting and really powerful examples. And just to highlight a few and let me know if this is accurate, that when we're looking at like the problematic states that are still issuing, this suppression, they're almost the exact same ones from the 1800s, from the late 1800s. And also voter suppression isn't just a white versus non-white issue. It's really, it's a working class or just the broader public versus, these governing elite interests that we need to take into account.
Absolutely. Anywhere that there's been an appointed disfranchisement of people of color, right along with it has followed mass disenfranchisement of poor whites. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to add just an example from when I litigated the Wisconsin voter ID case. We won at the district court level, but unfortunately we lost on appeal. But I had a witness in that case, and she was 92 years old, and she was born in Mississippi at home to a midwife. And she never had a birth certificate. And so her birth was actually recorded in a family Bible. And so she voted in every election. She moved to Wisconsin during the Great Migration, for more opportunity with her family. And she was a poll worker for, I think it was over 50 years or something like that. But when Wisconsin passed their strict voter ID law, she didn't drive. She was 92. She had no need to drive. She didn't have a driver's license. She didn't have a birth certificate to get a driver's license or to get a state ID. So her daughter actually had to pay over $2,000 in legal fees in order for her to actually get an ID. So she ended up getting an ID, she ended up voting, but her daughter had to spend $2,000. So that's a good example of a modern day poll tax. I would also point out with absentee and vote by mail, there are a lot of states that require your ballot to be notarized. So in Missouri right now, there's a lawsuit. There's over actually 300 lawsuits right now around the country trying to ease restrictions on voting during COVID-19. But there are organizations in our coalition who are suing the state of Missouri because they require you to get your absentee ballot notarized, which, as we all know, we've all had things notarized that at least cost $15. You have to go find a notary, and there's a shortage of notaries. So there's actually an effort in Missouri right now by voter protection advocates to recruit more people to be notaries so they can notarize ballots for people, So this is just a way of a modern day poll tax. And then, South Carolina, there was a Supreme Court case yesterday, which basically said that in South Carolina, voters have to have their ballot witnessed too. I have an aunt who lives there. She's blind. She lives alone. And she's in her late 70s. So she has to go find someone to witness that ballot. So there are a lot of parallels between the poll taxes that Nathan spoke about and what's happening right now currently in 2020.
One final example of that, I already spoke about language access and citizenship verification, but another example of voter suppression that's happening is really with what's happening with the census, and in trying to undermine what's happening with the census right now. As Galeo was part of the lawsuit against the Trump administration that helped remove the citizenship question from the census, because their intention was to specifically target the Latino community, Latino and immigrant community, from actually participating in the census. Why? It particularly was focused on Latino and immigrant participation because if you count less Latinos and immigrants, which there are many, then that reduces power and resources for local communities. Power in the sense of redistricting, in the sense of how districts are drawn in the gerrymandering process that does happen every 10 years around this country. So that's another way in which, even to this day, there's still court cases that are pending about when the census is going to be ending, because of the fact that the Trump administration was purposefully setting out with a racial agenda against Latinos and immigrants to try to suppress the counting of people living in the United States, specifically brown people in this case, to ensure that they can hold on to power in the redistricting process. And he went even a step further and issued an executive order that's still before the courts in trying to not have undocumented immigrants counted for the redistricting process, which is clearly against the Constitution. So that's another way in which a form of voter suppression has really evolved, and what we're facing even today.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And that's actually a really great parallel, Mr. Gonzalez, into my next question. So thinking about, we've discussed, what are the obstacles, passive, parallel, otherwise, in terms of keeping minority communities from voting. But when we think about voting, the important thing is the consequences, right? What legislation do some communities miss out into helping determine when they vote? So Mr. Gonzalez has already mentioned, just redistrict lines. But other examples of in legislature or other ways that allow minority representation in voting has resulted in maybe legislation that has negatively or otherwise impacted these particular communities. All right, can you hear me clearly right now?
Yeah, I think your audio is breaking up, Manny.
Okay. If my audio is so spotty.
It's better now.
Okay. Is it still okay? If not, I'm just going to ask Peggy to ask the next question. Okay, perfect. So what I was going to say was that You gave a really great example of thinking about how the lack of voter representation has resulted in impact in redistricting lines. So when we think about voting, it's like, okay, who has been prevented from voting, but also what is the impact of that? What legislation are certain communities prevented from helping determine, contributing their voices towards? So what would be another example of some legislation that has affected Black and Latino communities or other communities that has that would see a result of a lack of participation from minority communities being the cause of that?
So I'll try to respond, and I think as I mentioned, you were breaking up a little bit, but I think that there's a false notion of the lack of participation among minority communities leading to the type of legislation that we've seen. What we're seeing, I think, with legislation and with state laws is not an accident. It's not a coincidence that it happens. It's intentional voter suppression that is happening. So despite all of the gauntlet that Latino voters have to go through to exercise their right to vote in the state of Georgia, in the last 2018 midterm election, Latino voters were outpacing not just national voter participation rates of Latino voters, but all Latino voters in Georgia. From a demographic perspective, there was a report issued by the City University of New York that indicated that Latino voter participation was actually a record high. We've seen Latino voter participation rates in the state of Georgia outpacing the national Latino voter participation rates for several election cycles as well. So this notion of minority communities not wanting to participate and laws impacting in that way, I think is really a false notion. Latino communities and minority communities do want to participate and do want to have their voices heard and respected in this process.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a really great example. And I'll give it a second. Sorry for the audio issue, but if any of the other panelists want to contribute again, the question was that what are the implications to our democracy as a result of voter suppression within the Black and Latinx communities? Mr. Gonzalez gave us an example of misconceptions that have come as a result of us thinking that minorities don't participate. But what are other examples that could be implications to our democracy?
So I want to put a little bit of a provocation out there, just for us to consider. I know it's somewhat easy now to imagine, thinking in somewhat coded ways or speaking in coded ways in a partisan mode to say, we have Republican Party advocates and proponents who are making sure that minorities don't vote in order to beat Democrats. But I do think it's kind of important too to consider ways in which the Democratic Party tightly frames a lot of issues in order to reduce a certain kind of voter participation. I think this is similarly not as grand of a danger, certainly, but worth thinking about as we try to think about empowering voters in the most general sense. And the states that did not vote for Hillary Clinton, or the Hillary Clinton did not win, I should say, in the 2016 election: Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio. And there's I think Minnesota was the other state in the Rust Belt area. These are states that did not see the same kind of outreach from on the Democratic Party's part to Black voters in those states, right? I mean, the candidate did not land in those states, did not try to empower and get out the vote to the extent that they thought that those states were kind of a lock. And this has been a fascinating parallel. I'd be very curious to get Mr. Gonzalez's sense of the other side of this, where there was a lot of conversation, and there's been a lot of conversation in recent years about the demographic wave, or this kind of turnover to Latino voting, and how there is, there are a number of southern states, like for example, North Carolina in the Obama election, that were able to become blue states for the first time. And a lot of emphasis is placed there, and hoping that simply the demographic eventuality of a majority minority population will be enough. And so I'm very curious to know whether other folks on the panel, or even some of the guests, would consider about the extent to which even certain issue framing tends to demobilize and to alienate certain kind of voters in a way that has a suppressive effect. Like if you know, we saw record numbers of Black voter declines between 2012 and 2016, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 7 percentage points. Much of that is obviously voter suppression and the kind of concrete things, but it also leads one to question whether or not issues can be framed in such a way to help with, and if resources can be directed in such a way to help with voter mobilization. And if that means staking out in some places and in some ways a more progressive position on issues like police brutality or on issues like, you know, college funding or any number of other kind of so-called far left issues, we might want to consider that an aspect or a variable in how the electorate ends up being preconditioned for a particular kind of partisan outcomes and electoral concentrations.
Well, I could respond to that in the sense of, I mean, I think we have recent history of how that can play itself out as well. When we saw the gubernatorial race here in Georgia in 2018, with Stacey Abrams being the Democratic governor candidate at that time, I think what she did was really lean into progressive policies that Black, Asian, Latino communities really wanted to see. And our current governor won by the election, despite the fact that there were lots of lawsuits about voter suppression that would happen in 2018 as well, but only 50, by a margin of less than 50,000 votes. We have our current governor in office right now. So that's one example of how in the past parties have really have ignored or not looked at really doing true voter mobilization, not just in the Latino community, but also within the Black and Asian communities as well, because they think that may be alienating to maybe the mythical mainstream voter that many parties are trying to reach. And I think it's a losing proposition. We saw losing propositions associated with that time and time again in statewide competitive races here in Georgia. But I think, I mean, certainly Stacey Abrams showed a different way of reaching out to voters, particularly minority voters, and leaning into issues in ways in which mobilize voters to turn out to vote for candidates. Unfortunately, this cycle, we're not seeing a lot of that in Georgia, where I just had conversations with Spanish media and not a single campaign has made any kind of Spanish media buys this late in the campaign season yet. So I think, again, it's the issue is that some campaigns are taking voters for granted, and certainly that shouldn't be the case in a very competitive cycle that we're in right now.
Yeah, and I would just add that when we are doing our work, you know, we don't sell voting as the magic bullet that's going to solve all the problems. And I think we have to be honest with that, especially in the moment that we are in our country right now, is people are just saying, okay, if you want to fix, you know, if you want to end police brutality, just vote, right? And that's like the magic solution. And so we're saying that's really the first step. We need everyone to vote. And then, you know, you can be engaged in other ways beyond that. So I think it's really important that we're also not tone deaf when we're talking about voting in this cycle, and that we really are connecting it to the issues and kind of explaining how voting is really just the first step into being civically engaged.
Yeah, thank you for all those contributions. They make a lot of sense, and I think it helps us in you know, approaching this election cycle. And now I want to hand it off to Peggy. I had asked questions about the evolution of voter suppression, some examples, but Peggy will now go into thinking about how do we think of resolutions to these issues.
So as Manny said, we've talked a bit about the evolution of voter suppression, the challenges to voting, as well as contemporary racial inequities. So now it's time to talk about potential resolutions to voter suppression. So my first question is, what are some of the potential impacts of social media on voting and voter suppression within these communities?
Okay, well, I can start. So, we saw in 2016 that there was a targeted campaign by foreign actors to suppress the right to vote for people of color on social media platforms, most, Facebook in particular. So the Leadership Conference, we've actually been engaging with the platforms, and also we have a working group at the Leadership Conference made up of various organizations in our coalition that have really been pushing on the platforms to enforce their existing policies and also to expand them to make sure that they're removing content that could be harmful. It could be misinformation, disinformation, or voter suppression content immediately. We've seen some improvements, but still there's a lot more work to be done. As you know, there have been tweets and posts and by the president and others, really with a lot of falsehoods about vote by mail or absentee ballot drop boxes or what have you. One thing, the platforms have been really good at taking down misinformation about COVID-19. And we saw yesterday after the president tweeted his latest post about COVID-19 not really being that harmful, it was immediately taken down by Twitter. And so we've been pushing the platforms to do the same when it comes to voter suppression. And they've been reluctant to do so. So that's an ongoing battle that we've been really advocating for. It's been a really 4-year fight, but they still have a long way to go to make sure that they're addressing this.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, social media can also be a tool for good for our democracy as well. And I think we can't lose sight with that either. So in and of itself, social media has been really since March when the pandemic and the lockdown started happening and many of the stay-at-home orders were being issued. Our organization really took to digital organizing to ensure that we were still present in our community and we were still working to help folks be seen and respected, whether it's by participating in the census or registering to vote or becoming a U.S. citizen, naturalizing, become a U.S. citizen. So there's still things that I think social media and through the social media networks that there can be a lot of good associated with that. But as Lee was pointing out, there's also a lot of room for some falsehoods and some misinformation that purposefully sways people to, gives them the wrong information or actually sways people to not engage in the political process in our democracy that we have right now. So those are the types of things that we need to be watchful for. We've heard stories of how Latino voters are being targeted, in particular in Florida, by campaigns to sway them one way or another, with very misleading falsehoods targeting the Latino community. So those are the type of things that we need to watch for. We need to be careful with in this day and age of social media, because a lot can spread rather quickly within social media, and we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add very briefly is, very much in keeping with my colleagues and this kind of double-sided problem, is that, social media, as we know, allows people to kind of use commenting and retweeting and liking as a proxy for political work. And so there's a danger there. Don't limit your political participation to social media. At the same time, it presents an opportunity for the kinds of sustained flows of information and very rapid flows of information that we actually need as it concerns, one, again, thinking, to Ms. Chapman's point, beyond some of the electoral cycle of a given year about what kinds of organizing you want to do, but then also, I think, again, very pointedly and very intentionally thinking about local and state level politics. I mean, that really is the frontier right now that we have to spend much more energy thinking about and thinking through, because when you go back and look at and just reverse engineer how voter suppression works, we know, and the experts on this panel can tell you, that it works from the state level. It works from, state legislatures, and it obviously is impacted in places where, even smaller numbers of votes have tremendous outcomes in terms of, again, this kind of rolling effect. So, the extent to which we can actually use this global resource of the kind of World Wide Web to make very pointed and sustained local intervention, that to me at least feels like the greatest payoff that we can gain from the social media revolution.
So the conversation on the impact of social media sort of began to dive into ways to address voter suppression within the system. So my next question is, from an individual as well as a collective perspective, where does a person or a grassroots organization begin to address voter suppression within the system?
Well, I mean, I'll point to sort of the things that we do. Sometimes it is through mobilization. We can begin through mobilization and making sure that we're connected with the community, knowing what is happening with voter suppression. Then it's about holding elected officials accountable through policy and working towards policy changes that actually make voting easier rather than more difficult for folks. And then, I mean, looking into 2021, getting involved in the redistricting process, to make sure that communities are, the districts are being drawn, not just at the congressional level, but at the state legislative level, at the county level, even at the local level for dog catcher, that all of the districts are being drawn to reflect the values and perspectives of the communities in which they live in, rather than being diluted in that process. So there's a lot that can be done from a organizing perspective with regards to trying to fight voter suppression in the ways that we're facing it in today's age.
Yeah, we are really saying that the best counter to voter suppression in 2020 is voter empowerment. So, you know, making sure that you have a plan to vote, making sure that you're checking your voter registration or you're registering to vote if you're still able to in your state. You know, if you want to serve as a poll worker, you can also do that. You know, there is a shortage of poll workers because the average age of poll workers in our country is 65 years old. And a lot of older poll workers are not showing up because, you know, they don't want to get COVID-19 and they might be more susceptible. So we are working with this organization called Power the Polls to recruit more poll workers. And also, you can also sign up to be a volunteer for nonpartisan election protection. We partner with the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, and they have a hotline. It's 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and they have lawyers and grassroots volunteers manning that hotline, and they'll also be outside of polling places during early voting on election day. So those are ways that you can really address it this year. But as far as moving into 2021, you know, we are doing two things at the same time. We're preparing for the 2020 election, but we're also running all the various scenarios to see if Congress changes, what voter access bills we can potentially have enacted. So the two main ones we're supporting are for the PEOPLE Act, which is a huge omnibus bill that has campaign finance reform, ethics reform, and voting rights. It would, you know, have nationwide automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration. It would end felony disenfranchisement laws nationwide. You know, it would create independent redistricting commissions. And we also are supporting the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which was recently named the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act after his passing, which would restore the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, that was gutted by 5 justices of the Supreme Court in the Shelby County versus Holder case, which really opened the floodgates to voter suppression in states and jurisdictions that had a history of discriminating on people of color. So there's a lot of work to be done in the short term and kind of like the medium term, but I think voter empowerment is just critical. We have a campaign called Be an October Voter, so we're encouraging everyone to actually vote in October. You know, November 3rd is really the last time you can vote, and do it early. You know, you have a better chance at fixing any errors that might happen. You know, do it now, because as we get closer to the election, that's more difficult. And as we all know, Black and brown voters tend to have our ballots thrown out at higher rates, or, you know, are given provisional ballots at higher rates. So it's really critical to vote early.
So I would only add that, you know, it is important to look backwards in order to look forwards. I think there is a reason why in targeting the voting rights provisions and for that matter, targeting employment protections or, you know, other kinds of anti-racist policy, people have been trying to, you know, really take the historical elements out of it to give us a sense of historical amnesia. You know, no pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act, for example, as a historical measure. I raise this because, you know, we're in this moment where I think part of what has to happen is a kind of broad political education and problem reframing where, you know, if you think back to the 1940 election where like 3% of Black people voted in that election because voter disenfranchisement was so extensive, right? And that's when Roosevelt is president and the New Deal and everybody seems to be getting behind the country, you know, in all manner of ways. But the depth of voter disfranchisement was so broad and deep among Black people that it required extraordinary courage and extraordinary, you know, on the ground organizing, but education. Again, the Freedom Summer Initiative and the expansion of, you know, possibility happened by way of, you know, small groups of neighborhood associations and churches and, you know, one-room schoolhouses. And that is still required now. So as much as we're talking about the need for online, you know, organizing and other kinds of, you know, rapid speed of light mobilizations, the most durable bonds are still those that are based around community institutions. And so keeping that as an element of whatever strategy we put forward is going to be really important. We maintain a certain kind of relationship and connection to brick and mortar institutions and communities that are in danger. But secondly, even when you think back to this kind of nadir period where of mass voter disfranchisement or these really abysmal voting numbers from even 1940, Black folk did not stop and, you know, and frankly, you know, groups of migrant workers, you know, in California and in Texas and elsewhere did not stop thinking about their future in generational terms. And I think one of the dangers of this moment is that we tend to frame issues around election cycles and not think about them in generational terms. And so there needs to be much greater premium placed on what it means to sediment and build institutional knowledge, generational knowledge. Again, thinking about the question of elders who are, you know, manning polling places and voting in disproportionate numbers, right? These are the kinds of folks that we absolutely need to continue to stay closely connected to in the ways that we are already with families and our relationships through these institutions. But it's going to take a level of political maturity that doesn't have, you know, if for whatever reason the 2020 election doesn't turn in a way that many folks might want, that shouldn't then be reason to completely disengage, right? You have to think about it in much larger horizons. So that's the kind of thing where if you sometimes consider what it meant for folks in an era of deep disenfranchisement to continue to dream on what the future could hold, it feels necessary that remain part of whatever, you know, concrete strategy we also deploy now.
So as we talk about potential resolutions to voter suppression, that brings up the question of what solutions could address the root causes and eliminate the existing inequities, as well as asking how would the Black and Latinx groups be impacted by these proposed solutions?
I think I'll start because it's going to be quick. Again, I think, you know, historical education leads to empowerment. Empowerment leads to participation. Participation leads to transformation. And, you know, it's to me, at least, those are the critical steps. And certainly marginalized communities will be transformed in extraordinarily important and hopefully durable ways with that particular line of attack.
I think I'll add, I mean, some simple things that could happen to help people become more engaged in that process. I think same day voter registration, for example, is something that's really, there's issues with provisional ballots, there's issues with a lot of things that happen on election day. People thought that they were registered or not registered. Same day registration should be something that really should be a national standard for people to be able to exercise their franchise in a very easy way. And I think, I mean, looking at policy solutions as well to ensure that voters' rights are being protected and respected in that process, I think is going to be critical as we look further down the horizon, as Professor was talking about, to make sure that we can look at this in a longer view to make sure that we do create a better democracy that embraces us all rather than presents roadblocks for us to exercise our franchise.
Okay, so at this time, I would like to open up the floor to any questions and answers that the attendees may have. Feel free to type it up in the question and answer section, please. While we wait on any potential questions to be asked, I would like to ask all you panelists, how do you advise your community to engage in the voting process while considering the hurdles to register to vote, as well as vote in person or by ballot?
I think it's just, not to be repetitive, but it's making a plan, again, making sure you're familiar with the laws to vote in your state. There's 10,000 different election jurisdictions in our country. So elections are really run at the local level. And so election requirements can vary per state, it can vary per county. So one really good resource that we are pushing out is vote.org. And you can register to vote there. You can check your voter registration. You can find your polling place, which is really important because of the shortage of poll workers, because of COVID-19, a lot of polling places are being closed or consolidated or moved into these mega vote centers, like a lot of the NBA centers. So it's important for you to look up your polling place well in advance of Election Day. But vote in any way that's comfortable for you. If you want to vote by mail, do that. If you want to drop it off at a ballot box, do that. If you want to drop it off at an early voting center, you can make sure you do that. So there are a lot of options to vote, but you really need to be familiar with your state's rules and what the deadlines are where you live.
So there's a really great question that someone has given us in the Q&A, and I'll start by starting with the first one. So the question is, how do you talk about voting plans with your friends or families who say it won't matter because we live in a blue state? Or like, let's say in the alternative, it won't matter because we live in a red state. And that's basically the question of like, how is it that I communicate to someone that your vote is important when for them, they just see themselves as a part of a broader community that they think they can, lean on to do their job for them?
Well, I think one thing that we respond to that in that regard, particularly in the Latino community, those of us that are citizens have a responsibility to those that are not. When we talk about what's happened with DACA and the administration ending DACA and the potential deportation of folks that have essentially grown up here as one example. So I am a US citizen. I have privilege associated with that. I have also not just privilege, but a responsibility to exercise my franchise to speak up for my brothers and sisters who can't speak up in our democracy because they're not citizens yet. So I think it's a message of empowerment. It's a message of community. It's a message of engagement. The voter suppressors want folks to believe exactly what you're saying is that the vote doesn't matter. If the vote doesn't matter, why are they trying in a million different ways to suppress it? So think about that in that sense. Again, if we look at the margins of the Trump campaign in 2016, tens of thousands of votes, margins of differences in a few swing states made the difference there. So I would say that I mean right now in the 2016 election, Georgia was won by Trump by 200,000 votes. I mentioned our governor currently is in office by less than 50,000 votes. The Latino community right now, registered voters, is 250,000 strong. So Latinos already have the power to make a difference in an election. We just have to show up and vote. So it's a matter of making sure that we feel empowered in and of ourselves of truly the potential that we have as voters to truly make a difference in this election cycle.
Another really great question that was asked is, how should 2020 voter policy take into consideration the disproportionate impacts of COVID and public health crises on communities of color?
I'll leave that to the activists. It's a tough.
Yeah, I mean, when we were pushing for federal funding, for example, we were really trying to make sure that that money was going to communities that were hardest hit by COVID-19, that are also hardest hit by voter suppression, because we knew that this was really going to be an issue. But I think that, you know, Jerry can probably talk about Georgia and how Georgia has dealt with this. Because there's been a gap in funding, you know, we've seen businesses step up. So for instance, Facebook, well, it wasn't Facebook, it was actually Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. Through their foundation, they donated $300 million to help fund election administration. So we were trying to make sure that funds like that were being directed to the communities that were most hit by COVID-19. But I don't know, Jerry, if you have anything to talk about with Georgia and how Georgia's handling it.
Yeah, there's a variety of different things I think that we in the progressive space community, groups that are focused on promoting democracy and protecting civil rights and voting rights in particular. There's a couple of different things that we're doing. Number one, we need to make sure that voters are fully aware of all the options that they have to exercise their right to vote. First, voting by mail is an option, but there's a process associated with that. There's very specific instructions that people have to follow associated with voting by mail, because if you don't follow those instructions, then it opens up for the vote not to be counted in that process. And then again, we have the second option of voting in person early, and that starts actually on Monday, October 12th. We start early voting in the state of Georgia through the 30th. And then of course, the last option, as Ms. Chapman has pointed out, the last option is on election day, November 3rd. So there's a lot of things to happen in place, and we need to educate our community about all the different options. And then the community needs to decide. We've seen the disproportionate impact in Black and brown communities that COVID has had, not just by health impact, but also economically has drastically impacted Black and brown communities. So we need to exercise our options. We need to find out what those are, but we need to make a plan and then make sure that we make the plan with plenty of time to where there's contingencies that we can take into consideration to exercise our right to vote in that way. On election day and during the early voting process, many of our groups are going to be doing a lot of poll monitoring, offering voters in line masks if they don't have masks. If long lines are starting to form, we're going to have snacks, maybe some food for folks while waiting in line, provide them with water to make sure to encourage people to stay in line and not to give up on exercising the right to vote. So there's a lot of things that we can do leading up to election to make sure that people can safely cast their vote and make sure that they have the options. And if the absentee voting by mail option closes, well, then you must vote in person. If voting in person passes you by, well, then you have in Georgia, at least you have from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. to be able to cast your vote on election day. So making sure that people are aware of those, and if they encounter problems, to call the 866-OUR-VOTE number to make sure that those problems can be addressed immediately while they're at the polling location, while they are in the voting center, to ensure that their vote will be counted and not cast in a provisional ballot. So it's really important for people to be educated about their options and to plan ahead and to execute the plan in October. And as Ms. Chapman said, to be an October voter, so that way there's plenty of time to exercise any kind of options that any roadblocks that you may overcome, you may have to overcome while exercising your franchise.
I think there was also another really great question in terms of the Electoral College. The question is, how does the Electoral College contribute to modern day voter suppression with our contemporary elections? What's the future of the Electoral College? But I also want to add to that to think about how is it that, voters can actually have greater power than the Electoral College? What ways can we put pressure on it? And in what ways do we really have the control over what we often see as this black box institution that is determining the outcomes behind the scenes?
I defer to the professor on this one.
So given the winner take all nature of these electoral votes, obviously, one of the most immediate consequences of this is that it creates huge asymmetries in outcomes from state to state. So, in a state like Michigan, where Trump barely eked out a win by a 0.5%, he gets all those electoral votes, whereas Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump by, I think it was 5 million votes in California, right? And she got those votes, but obviously it didn't matter in terms of what that margin meant for the general election, as we know, for the general vote. And so, the Electoral College is there as an institution, as a holdover to make it possible for states that don't have high concentrations of population seemingly not have a weakened political representation, but we know obviously that they're in practice, what has happened, especially as the country's demographic picture has changed, is that it has become a very handy way, just to be very explicit, in shoring up white political power in a changing country. And so it is, I think, useful to talk about what the future of voting will mean in terms of getting much more in line with a general sense of popular vote and how we register that. As with any of the other, recommendations that one can put forward for how to stop voter suppression, whether you're talking about the courts or gerrymandering or anything else, it requires, robust, consistent, dogged political engagement and organizing, and, finding ways to get the Congress to change the electoral system in ways that abolishes the Electoral College should be, certainly on the agenda, but it will be as important as any other of these issues to think about it generationally. We will not see the Electoral College abolished in time for the 2024 election, or frankly, 2028. And so, we would need to, I think, prepare for a long-term strategy to see that eventuality occur.
And now I'll just like to add that the presidency is not the only thing that we're voting for that is impacted by the Electoral College. We have sheriffs, we have district attorneys, we have state legislators, we have county commissioners, we have all and at the very local level, elections that are being held. And I think the Electoral College distracts us from all those other policy decision makers that we are electing down ballot as well, that are even much more impactful on our daily lives than an office so far off as the presidency as well. So I think it's a good question of the Electoral College. We need to take the long game on that, but more down to earth and immediate impact are some of the local offices that we're going to be voting on as well.
just to piggyback there, that would have been my answer for why to encourage people to vote in solid blue states as well, right? Because it's not just about whether that state is going to turn, but it's exactly to the point that Mr. Gonzalez is raising, that there are going to be a whole host of things on any given ballot, midterm or major election, that are going to require your electoral input.
So our last live question tonight is about Stacey Abrams. So Stacey Abrams shared on one of her trainings that we have to address voter suppression and voter depression. How can we couple the push for voting with voters' emotional health since the 2016 election?
I would just say that, for a lot of us that are in this, who have worked on a lot of different election cycles, this is probably the most taxing election cycle. We have breaking news almost every hour now. So I totally understand that people might be disengaged or feel tired. We're in the middle of a pandemic as well, so that adds a whole nother layer to it. But I would just, go back to, we can't see the change we want to see in our country long term unless people vote. And that's really what we need to do right now. And we need to vote at massive numbers this election. One thing that I wanted to flag, though, is the election results and what happens post November 3rd. Because of the large numbers of vote by mail ballots that we're seeing, many states actually don't start counting mail ballots until election day. And so we most likely will not know the winner of the, at least, presidential election, and for a few weeks, potentially, maybe longer, if there's litigation. So we should just prepare ourselves for that. We're used to staying up late on election night and seeing the states shade red and blue. That's just not the reality of this year. With the pandemic that we're in right now. But that doesn't mean that anything is happening that's fraudulent. It just means that votes are being counted. We want every vote to be counted. We want every provisional ballot to be verified. We want voters to have an opportunity to cure any mistakes that happen or any administrative errors. So it's just a system playing out. It's election officials doing their job. So that's a piece that we have to prepare for. That's unlike any other election that we've seen. It's going to take longer.
And then I'll add, so election day is just one day in our democracy, and it doesn't, that then comes, democracy is not a spectator sport, and we all need to engage in it every single day to make sure that our voices are heard. Once elected officials are elected, then the accountability phase of our democracy comes into play, where it requires us all to be engaged in that process. And yes, people need to disconnect and connect in ways that make sense for them, for their mental health. But we also need to connect in ways right now to make sure that our voices are heard in our democracy, and voting is really the way to do that. And as you can hear, my dog wants to have a word in too.
Thank you all so much, both panelists as well as the audience, for your participation and engagement in the discussion. As we wrap up tonight's panel, I would like to introduce Misty McKeon, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Social Concern.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Misty McKeon, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Center for Social Concern. The Center for Social Concern is focused on getting students to be active citizens in whatever community they call home through education, action, and reflection. And part of that activity, and especially at this time, is that we are very focused on Hopkins votes, and we have a short presentation to share with you. A little bit of background before I turn it over to the students on our videos to talk about voter engagement is that Hopkins Votes is really focused on 3 specific areas. One is voter registration, which we have certainly focused on tonight and heard wonderful accounts from our presenters. We focus on ballot access and making sure that every Hopkins affiliate, student, faculty, and staff understands how to access their ballot this year and in every year. And the third pillar is really about getting out the vote and that messaging. And so you've heard many times tonight how important it is to make your plan to vote and to show up and cast that ballot in October or, at latest November 3rd. And so we're also really encouraging you to think about get out the vote and what that means for every individual and how you can not just create your plan, but talk to your friends, talk to your family members about ways that they will get that information out. Our nonpartisan campaign doesn't support students through their process of who to cast a ballot for, but it's really about making sure that your voice is heard by casting your vote. So we are really thrilled, and I'm excited to see so many staff members and students logging in tonight to do this. So if you can see my background, I welcome you to take advantage of the Hopkins Votes website, which is available to all Hopkins affiliates and get access to resources that are available for you to help promote Hopkins Votes and really have that one-on-one conversation with individuals. So with that, I am going to begin our video and share with you a little bit about Hopkins Votes.
I'm taking action by registering voters.
I'm taking action by voting.
I'm taking action by requesting my absentee ballot.
Hi everyone, my name is Ami and I'm going to show you how easy it is to use TurboVote to make sure that you are ready to vote for the November 3rd election and any other elections to come. So if you don't know whether or not you've registered, you don't know how to request an absentee ballot, starting at jhu.turbovote.org is a great place to start. So as soon as you log in, go ahead and click Get Started. And from here you can input your name, how you want to receive notifications, and then from there you can choose whether or not you want to register to vote, just check your status, or maybe request an absentee ballot. From there, TurboVote will talk you through the entire process step by step and make sure that you are 100% ready to cast your ballot for the November election.
Here on the Hopkins Votes website, you can visit the Hopkins Votes Toolkit, available to all GHU affiliates, and take a look at the resources here available to you to be part of the process. I want to quickly show you how we have been able to set our goals based on real data collected from Tufts National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, NSOLVE, which provides participating institutions de-identified overview of how their students are voting. As you can see here, we have reports dating back to 2012 for your review. As we come into the next presidential election, we are going to do our best to be sure we outpace our 2016 rate of 55.8% student voters. Visit the website to see more about the breakdown of our student voter populations.
Registration deadlines are happening this week, so make sure to check out TurboVote and Hopkins Votes as soon as possible, and feel free to reach out to Hopkins Votes if you have any questions.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Misty, for that incredible presentation. I'm Dr. Susanna Ferradas, and I serve as the co-chair for the Race Matters Speaker Series. First off, I want to thank our esteemed panelists, Lee Chapman, Dr. Nathan Connolly, and Jerry Gonzalez for being here with us tonight. I also want to thank my brilliant co-chair, Kwame Phillips, and the rest of the committee, Dr. Candace Baldwin, Jess Cupper, and Elena Thompson. And certainly our sponsors, the Office of Student Life, the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and the Center for Social Concern. Our moderators, who did an incredible job, Peggy and Manny. We hope that you gained a lot of knowledge about how racial inequities and voter suppression impact Black and Brown communities, as well as our democracy. We know that the event has ended, but our work surely has just begun, as you've heard from our esteemed guests. I know that I've learned a lot and been challenged today to think about more ways to be civically engaged in the short term and in the long term. As we heard, it's a long-term game from Jerry Gonzalez. And so we look forward to having you engage in our Race Matters speaker series. We will continue to have future events focused on how we can move from theory to practice and get engaged in our community. So please be on the lookout for more information. Thank you so much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a wonderful evening.